of all, let me welcome my panelists here, and thank you all of you for joining in here. I think the topic that we are talking here is how decentralization in technology is reinventing time-worn industry practices. And for the sake of this discussion, we'll keep it slightly broad. Everything under the sun which is around decentralization, blockchain, Web3, metaverse, so please feel free to IoT, anything which is connected makes sense for this discussion, right? So we'll keep it free flowing, and by the end of the panel, we'll also probably spare 10 minutes for audience to ask questions. So if you have any thoughts, please collect your thoughts. We'll be happy to answer those questions as well, right? So Abhay, let me start with you. Your initial thoughts, maybe a quick one-line introduction about what you're doing currently, where you come from, so that the audience also understands what's the stand and where you're coming from. What is your current role? How are you associated with Web3? And then maybe start off with, in your industry area, what's the kind of disruption, what's the kind of change that you're seeing? Now you can talk specifically about your company, and this is for all my panel members, or broadly about your industry. So that I leave it to you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Pankaj. Am I audible? Yeah? All right. Hi, my name is Abhay Tandon. I'm the Global Digital Innovation Officer at TVS Motor Company and a few other group companies. That's one of the hats that I wear. That's where I get the money coming in. And then I wear another hat, which is the co-founder and GP of a syndicate and a micro fund called as 321 Capital. That's where the money goes out, right? So those are the two responsibilities that I'm dealing with at the same time. Now, in terms of my role and applicability of blockchain, I think blockchain, Web3 is still new comparatively on the hype cycle, right? But blockchain has been around for a while, right? So my past background has also been into retail. And that's where we have seen blockchain since 2015 or even prior to that, right? So it's not new. It's just that, it's becoming more and more out there today with more enterprises, more ecosystem players adopting that ecosystem, that technology, right? And its applications. At TVS, of course, there are a lot of applications, when you talk about the whole supply chain, TVS is the fourth largest two-wheeler company across the globe. And there are 9 other companies that I'm part of, right, dealing with NBFCs to real estate to manufacturing and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff around blockchain that can be done, which is B2B fronting, as well as Web3 at large. And then there are applications on the consumer-facing side as well, right? Starting from metaverse to NFTs being the most common ones. In fact, TVS launched TVS Motorverse last year in October as well. First two-wheeler in the country to do so. So those are certain areas that we are definitely bullish on. Lots of applications that we can discuss over the course of the panel as well.
It's on? Yeah, perfect. So my name is Kush. I currently head the technology vertical at Noise. Noise is India's largest smartwatch company and number 3 globally.
How many of you knew that Noise is the biggest smartwatch brand company in India?
Good audience.
I think it was interesting for me also.
Yeah, yeah. And smartwatch is a very new vertical. Of course, I mean, the ecosystem is still evolving and it's seeing a massive growth right now in the country. In India, we have a 30% market share almost. So every third smartwatch sold in India is now a Noise watch. In terms of me personally looking into Web3, I'm generally, again, like personally very motivated to learn about Web3. I've been investing. Stan Parth is a good friend of mine, also one of the investors in the company. And also looking at various other Web3 companies in the gaming space, in the NFT space, and DeFi space. So Web3 is of very personal interest to me. In terms of what wearable technology and IoT is doing in the Web3 space, there's a lot of things happening. For example, one of the few things that I did when I was part of my previous company called Senra, which I exited recently. A new company called Helium had gotten into space, which is into LoRaWAN networks by the people for the people, right? So it's a decentralized network technology. And it's traditionally a very kind of capex heavy industry. Not a lot of people would try to get into it. Only the biggies in the ecosystem, somebody like Jio or Airtel might want to get into it. So these kind of technologies with blockchain become enabled, and people could get incentivized to even participate in such technologies, which otherwise is a very capex heavy industry. Generally, people would not want to invest into such technologies unless there is a big ecosystem out there. So for me personally, blockchain is of great interest, and I think like from the wearable technology also, there's a time and place for Web3 to get integrated into the wearable space. So I look forward to kind of the rest of the discussion around this.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. This is Mayank. I'm responsible for technology and digital at Fortis Healthcare. And unlike some of my other panelists and the previous panel, I think the way we kind of consider Web3 in our industry context is probably at a little lower gradient when you kind of look at from the possible excitement. We don't really have the opportunity of going to sleep after gaming or waking up and doing the first thing as gaming. It is much more pragmatic, where we are looking at the usage of IoT enabled devices in our setup, which can actually help in improving the patient monitoring, particularly on the remote patient monitoring side. Usage of any of those devices which can actually help in having more timely information flowing into the doctors, to the clinicians, for taking a relevant action when it is much needed. Otherwise, there's always a very strong dependency on the nurses or the clinicians to be there at all points of time, which is technically not possible. So those are some of the initial use cases which are now started flourishing in the industry. There's a long way to go. And the other side that really is of interest and is kind of being slightly dabbled with at this point of time is how do we really secure the patient data? How do we use Web3 technologies, perhaps blockchain, to look at securing this information, making it available to the relevant parties who need to access that information, in a manner which is going to be completely secure. Now, that could be with the insurers, with other healthcare providers, the regulatory bodies, etc., etc. Keeping in mind that the data first belongs to the patient, so there is a patient consent available, and then only it is being shared with whoever that is required. So these are some of the top use cases that really is of interest from a healthcare industry standpoint, and we'll probably discuss a little more as we move forward in the conversation.
Sure, thanks Mayank, and thank you everyone for your initial remarks. So what we'll do probably is go a little deep into one use case, because you come from that industry, so for you it's so natural. But I think for the interest of the audience, Abhay, starting with you, I would request you to pick one use case, either consumer facing or B2B, which holds a lot of promise, and using that use case you can probably paint the picture of how things are going to change. I'm sure that will help the audience in being able to visualize it much better.
Sure, thank you so much, Pankaj. A little tone, B2B has a lot of promise too. Their own challenges in B2B, specifically supply chain, right, to bring the whole ecosystem together. Something that I'm more passionate for the near term is Metaverse, which is a B2C application that I'm thinking of for right now. I mean, Metaverse can be used for digital twinning.
So let me provoke you before you proceed further. Is it just a hype or is it a reality? How
Metaverse?
Yeah. So I think now you can continue.
All right. So firstly, this comes as a question more often than not if Metaverse is Web3. Metaverse is not obviously all the time Web3, right? So that's the first and more obvious thing that should be out there. Roblox, which is one of the biggest Metaverse platforms, if I'm not wrong, is a Web2 platform, right? It's not a Web3 platform, right? But there are lots of others.
So again, my intent is not to interrupt you, but to keep making it more and more clear to the audience. What do you mean by Metaverse need not be Web3?
Okay.
The transaction part, the visualization part. So if you can elaborate a little more on that, and then we'll continue with your answer.
See, the core tenets of Web3 allows you to have immutability, transparency, and so on and so forth, right? And that is why when you put a metaverse and all the transactions happening on a chain, any kind of transactions that are getting recorded on a ledger system, that is where the metaverse is on Web3, right? But that doesn't really mean that metaverse has to be on Web3. Metaverse as a concept has been around since, again, early 2010s, right? And that's when 360-degree showrooms were never on Web3, right? So that's the same thing, right? And we are still following that. A lot of people say that, they have dabbled into Web3, but they have dabbled into metaverses, which are on Web2. So that's something that I wanted to clarify first, right?
So just to reiterate the point, the visual experience of a walkthrough or a 360-degree view or experiencing is what you're talking about, the metaverse. And generally when we talk about it in the context of Web3, we also talk about the transactions which may happen in metaverse, which are essentially and generally on blockchain kind of a thing, which follow the typical rules of blockchain. So you're talking about the metaverse, which is the visual experience, the
combination of both. Right now I'm talking about combination of both that I'm personally excited about. Reason I'm excited about is that, it becomes a very unique and differentiated channel to reach out to your consumers, right? So you can compare that with a WhatsApp, an email or a SMS, right? It's another channel at the end of the day, but it's much more experiential, right? Now again, there's a question of manipulation which is being taken care of by being on the chain, which is where every transaction is very fair to the consumers and to the organizations in place, right? And that is what I'm very excited about, because I see this going and really creating a lot of impact from a unit economic standpoint when companies are trying to get their users to be loyal to them, engage with all the different products possible in the whole umbrella of the group, and then in that same time be immersed and stay immersed in that environment itself. So eventually, it will be an environment where, if I can take an analogy, Pankaj, if I can do that, right? In my head at least, this is the analogy I think of. All of you have heard of hot desking, and it's become much more famous after COVID, right? Hot desking is an environment where, today you are sitting on one seat in your office, tomorrow you'll have to sit on some other seat. It's not like a dedicated desk available to you. That's the same analogy that I use for websites versus metaverse. Today on websites, you go there, you transact, and you lose information. You may or may not be able to capture the same amount of information that you've been dabbling with in that environment. On metaverse, it's like a dedicated seat. So you can go there, set up everything about your personality, about your persona out there. For example, on a TVS consumer, a TVS 360-degree view consumer showroom of sorts, right? You can even personalize it to that level that you can, let's say, integrate with your Spotify playlist. So when you're inside that environment, you're listening to your own music, you are actually booking a test ride, you're racing with TVS bikes, you are actually having a complete digital passport of every information available about your bike, its services, its spare part warranties, the current price of your bike basis, all the connected data that you've been gathering on the driving patterns as well as purchases. And let's say you can also take a loan and so on and so forth. So it becomes a holistic ecosystem for which you can initiate even a service, for example, right then and there. You don't need to step out of it. So this is my North Star vision, which is very, very hyper-personalized for every consumer on a metaverse. And I think that will ensure and allow for a much better transactional practice, which is both meaningful as well as seamless.
Right. And Abhay, staying on metaverse, a couple of questions which come to my mind. One, with the kind of bandwidth that we have, with the kind of devices and other things, how far or how close do you think the adoption of metaverse, the greater adoption of metaverse? That's one question. And second question is, in the last 1 year that you guys have had this metaverse, have you seen a pattern in the kind of demographic, the kind of audience that is more in tune to metaverse? Is it the younger guys or is it across the age groups? What has been your early trends?
Today, fortunately, when we launched TVS Motorverse, we were very, very cautious about making sure it's accessible, right? So we made sure it's not, you can use a device, but you can view it on your mobile app as well, or on your laptop as well, right? So you don't need a device to go into TVS Motorverse, right? And that was the accessibility point of view, right? Now, a pro gamer, for example, if you're playing a TVS game, right, a very high-def game, you may have a better experience with a headset as against on your mobile, more immersive. But at the same time, you can still at least have a good understanding of what the game is, even on your mobile app, right? You don't need to have a headset. So it makes it more accessible. And I think as the technology is getting more and more mature and beyond the hype cycle, you would start to see a lot of these problems being solved for, right? These are initial problems, these are initial hiccups, and as we speak, these challenges are getting resolved day by day, right? Accessibility is a major challenge in this space. So that's one, and I think that is evolving. To your second point, in terms of the age groups, see, when we launched TVS Motorverse, we brought in a singer who did a concert with us by the name Arman Malik. Now, at 37, 38, I did not know who Arman Malik was, right? Supposedly, he's a big name in the singing ecosystem, and he's a very famous artist. You know, a lot of youngsters are big fans. Right? The moment I spoke about a guy called Arman Malik singing doing a concert at TVS Motorverse, and people were like, "Wow, man!" And I was like, "Okay, is it okay?" I had no freaking clue. Right?
We are Anu Malik generation.
Yeah, we are. We are Anu Malik generation. So with Arman Malik coming in, the target audience who came in were a lot of youngsters, right? And that's where I see in global metaverses as well. For example, if we think about setting up a TVS Motorverse instance on a Roblox or a Fortnite, the target group, age group over there that you'd see with massive adoption would be between 12 to 20, right? Which means that we are thinking ahead and saying that, you know, these are potential consumers. And why is it important for TVS? Think of an aspirational brand like a Ferrari. Can I buy a Ferrari today? Unfortunately, I can't. You know, I've invested a lot of money in startups, so I don't have the money enough to buy a Ferrari. But even if I could, I probably wouldn't. But that doesn't mean that Ferrari is not an inspirational brand or aspirational brand, right, to me. Which means I can buy a Ferrari watch. I can buy a Ferrari perfume. I can buy a Ferrari jacket. And that's what we think, that, you know, if we have, TVS today is present in 80 countries, but let's say not in US. If we are on Fortnite, think of the unit economics impact. For 1 year, if people are engaging with TVS-based game on Fortnite with the age group of 12 to 20, then that means there's a strong recall, brand recall. And next year, if we launch in a market like US as the 81st country, hopefully, then in that case, the unit economics or the CAC comes down and the unit economics become much better for us. And so there are lots of direct and indirect value adds that we are seeing right now. Even the indirect and brand value adds are going to gradually turn into tangible outcomes. For example, a lot of people do not know that TVS has a brand called as TVS Racing, which is the #1 two-wheeler factory racing team in the country for the last 2.5 decades or more, right? All the top racers represent us in the country. People don't know about it. Now, through these mediums, we get that information out, build a better brand of not just being, you know, very strong at racing, but being very innovative at it. So this platform allows us to do that more effectively with the youth of the country or various countries as well.
Great insights, Abhay. Thanks. So moving on, Kush, when you were giving your introductory remarks, you spoke so naturally about LoRaWAN. The first thing I would request you is to expand a little more on LoRaWAN. How many of you here have heard about LoRaWAN? Do you know about it? Yeah, so obviously very few. I want you to do a little bit more common man understanding or explanation of LoRaWAN, and probably some of the use cases that will run on LoRaWAN, because I think that will be the easiest way for people to understand, especially in the context that we hear about 5G, we hear about LTE, private networks and all that. So in all that, what is the significance of LoRaWAN, and how do you tie it up with the decentralized nature of that network?
Yeah, I mean, I had a very technical short talk. I should have probably gone more into the...
it was good enough.
Yeah. So basically, LoRaWAN is a network which people could set up on their own, and it's a network that penetrates through a long distance. So for example, you have your traditional 4G, 5G kind of infrastructure, which is not a very short range, but a medium range kind of a protocol, right? LoRaWAN is a kind of network where devices around you could connect for several kilometers range and could have a battery life that could span several years. And so it's a very, it's a use case friendly kind of a ecosystem where you have, for example, a smart water meter or a smart gas meter that could run for 10 years or so without having to change the battery or without having to bring the base station right next to the device to collect the data. So it's kind of a simple, in technical terms, a star topology where all these devices around you are sending data to the central servers, right? Again, like the idea of LoRaWAN is in itself a decentralized idea because it takes the power away from a few network operators in the ecosystem. You know, you don't need a Jio or a Airtel or a Vodafone's network in that area to build this kind of infrastructure. You could rather do it on your own, right? A small company, a startup could even start deploying a LoRaWAN network in the whole city and then enable a smart use case. So with that context, now combine this with the power of decentralization, right? When you have something like LoRaWAN or a network which a person or a company or a startup could deploy on its own, combine that with the kind of data that you collect from the end devices. If you, for example, I'll give you a simple example. If you, for example, collect the data and the data could be validated, meaning the data could be acknowledged by a cohort of nodes which are responsible for, let's say, the sanity of the data, right? That's a Web3 example. Now what you just did is you combined the power of networks, decentralized the networks, as well as decentralized the data from the IoT devices that you were collecting, right? Now this is a very typical way of thinking about decentralization. So while I think Abhay was talking about his favorite kind of aspects of Web3. For me, it's more to do with decentralization, where I see people getting incentivized for unique operations, for unique businesses that they could develop, and all the participants of the business start making money, start getting a share of the revenue of setting up this kind of a business model. So with that context, let's say, I also spoke about a company called Helium, which already started doing this kind of a thing. They sold more than 1 million hotspots, Helium hotspots, in about a span of less than a year. And it's a significant revenue just from the sale of hardware itself. But what people started doing is that, okay, I have a housing society, I have a hospital nearby, I have a parking lot. Let me just go out and deploy a Helium network in that area. Just 4 or 5 hotspots cover the entire, let's say, hospital area. And the entire IoT device ecosystem in the hospital area, be it the parking area in the hospital or the patient monitoring, any kind of devices like the metering devices, everything connects to the Helium network. And in Web3, again, like there is a concept of a faucet, which is injecting tokens into the Web3 space. And there's a concept of a sink, which is taking out the tokens from the system. Both are really important because that's what determines the value of your token, right? The supply and the demand, both sides of it. So Helium did a very nice innovative use case where they basically injected tokens in the system through the network that people deploy, and the devices who use these networks are basically the sinks. So the devices have to pay in tokens to use the network services. It's a very unique use case. People started getting incentivized because if I'm a user, I deploy 4 Helium gateways around me, I start minting the Helium token. I start mining the Helium token. So I generate value from creating the network. And it went boom, you know, within a span of 6 months, you had 1 million Helium, based base stations sold. The value of the Helium token itself skyrocketed, I think, from about like 0.2 or 0.002 something US dollars to probably like 17, 18 US dollars, so like X times returns. And this is a very typical example of how Web3 could enable business models that the world had not seen till date. So for me, that power of decentralization, very, very typical from such use cases. And it's for me, Web3 is an infrastructure which people could utilize and be creative with while not focusing on creating the infrastructure, rather creating the brand or the use case out of the infrastructure. I think it's like the early days of internet where people were devising HTTP protocols. Who makes money out of HTTP, right? Nobody. And who makes money out of TCP IP? Nobody, right? It's not proprietary. But people still invested time, energy into building the infrastructure, and now people started utilizing HTTP for creating websites and business models around this kind of an infrastructure. So that's where I see the Web3 ecosystem also kind of shaping up.
Very nicely said, Kush. So just to complement to what Kush said, I hope all of you were able to catch that. LoRaWAN is essentially an unlicensed band technology, which means the Airtels of the world or Geos of the world don't have to pay a huge license fee to government, which in turn means that the consumer doesn't have to pay a lot of money. That's one. Second, your GSM, 5G, 3G, 4G, all of them have been created for voice-based communication. That's how we essentially use. They're not very optimized for data communication. LoRaWAN is for data communication, which means your smart devices, your agriculture field devices, your parking lot devices, or gas meters and the other examples, utilities that he gave, right? And if that network is optimized for data, which is very small amount of data, the other constraint is also about battery life. You don't want to get up in the morning and charge all your devices so that they work, right? I mean, one classical example which has been discussed so many times is about women's safety, for example, a pendant which the woman can wear and, you know, in terms of any emergency can raise a alarm. Now imagine if that lady, I mean, it can be for a boy or girl, but I'm just taking the example of a girl. A girl is in a parking lot or in a, you know, cellar which is 4 floors down. Your GSM network doesn't work. LoRaWAN has been designed to work 7 floors underground. LoRaWAN has been designed to work in remote places. Plus, you don't want to be in a situation where the battery is not on, or, you know, the device is not charged, or every day you have to carry the device. So that's where it becomes very significant that that battery in a LoRaWAN device will work for years. So I think we have to look at it from that context, and this whole beautiful analogy that Kush has brought about decentralized network and decentralized applications over a decentralized network. I think that becomes very, very strong. So great insights, Kush. Thank you so much. Mayank, health industry, I think all of us at some point or the other have to visit a hospital, either for our relatives or for any other thing. And there seems to be a lot of confusion about the stakeholders, right? I'm not holding you responsible for that, but I'm trying to ask you, how do you see Web3? And you spoke about it in your initial remarks, the insurance company, the hospital, and when I have to take a second opinion from a doctor, could be within the country or abroad. How do all these things come together in a Web3 ecosystem so that for the patient, it's a seamless experience? Because today, best of us who are privileged also find it very difficult to get the case details from the hospital, use it for second opinion from other doctor, have the insurance claim without a lot of hiccups. And I shudder to think what happens to a common man. That's one point. Maybe you can complete that, and I have a follow-up question on the security of the data itself. So maybe first we can start with this.
Yeah, so I think, you know, very valid point. On the healthcare side, you know, how patients have really, you know, survived in the entire setup. When it comes to the experience part, I think is something which is, you know, which could be different, which could be much better. So of course, you know, country has the best of doctors, clinicians as a whole, and the doctors also, you know, as a community have kind of focused on the patient well-being and ensuring that the patient goes back home safely, you know, with all the ailments cured to the extent that they can be once they visited a hospital. But people have not really focused on delivering a great experience, you know, which will cover the non-clinical aspects. So that is an area which can possibly be made better using the Web3 you know, technologies. And as the simplest part there is just the electronic health records, electronic medical records, the patient data itself. Now that is typically there in the hospital systems. For the patients, it is usually there in the form of you know, certain prescriptions, which is there on pages, you know, medical reports, you know, investigation reports from radiology or any other investigation that the patient has undergone within the hospital setup. Now, this could be in the form of images, videos, combination of you know, these elements, and of course, you know, plain text, which could be typewritten if you're lucky, or it could be handwritten, you know, if you really you know, actually visited a hospital where doctors prefer to write. So now with this, if you need to look at transferring this information to another healthcare provider for getting a second opinion, or for just having a control of that data itself, it's a tedious task. Of late, a lot of this information has started getting digitized, which people can now access on the mobile apps, typically like an e-prescription. The medical reports, you undergone an investigation, let's say for example a blood test, you will possibly have that report you know, available on the mobile app if you are actually dealing with the same provider. But if you've got that on a standalone basis, it may not be in the same set of records. And if you need to really send this to somebody you know, outside the hospital network, usually it is a challenge. This is where the possibilities are there on, you know, Web 3.0. The information that is available with the hospitals can be converted or can be put across on a platform by which the patient will have an access to share this with any other provider, of course of their own free will, hence the consent part is taken care of. If they don't really want to extend that access beyond a certain point of time, they can revoke that access. So that way, the other healthcare providers get access to this information, use it, can't download or save it, unless you want, and your objective is fulfilled. Incidentally, there's a large government program which is running in to enable this. Some of you might have experienced it or heard about it, called ABDM, Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, where government is kind of looking at creating a similar infrastructure by which patients or the consumers would have access to their healthcare records available with any hospital within the country, tagged under their ABHA ID, which is Ayushman Bharat Health Account, a unique identifier which would allow access to this information, by which it can be shared with any provider who is on the same network. That's where the power of network comes into play. Enable that access for the period that is required, disable it when it is not required, and the patient controls this entire set. Now, kind of parallels to the Web 3.0, but this is the second part, the latter one that I spoke about, is being led by the government, but there is an independent use case also available within the healthcare setup, where some of these things were being experimented, are still being experimented by the healthcare providers. Maybe not really in a very, very big manner, because maybe a parallel program has come in, and people are still somewhere grappling about what is the adoption that they would be looking at, because it will require a large consortium or a network to really make it worthwhile for the patients or for the users. If it is still being done on a standalone basis, it is not really going to create much of a value. So that's I think the space where we're seeing some bit of traction, and I think the way it is actually going, and a lot of push from the government, I think it is going to see a lot of acceleration in times to come.
Great points, Mayank. And so how close are we to one nation, one health card?
So I think the answer kind of lies in 2024. Don't want to make it a political debate here. But I think, irrespective of, who is actually running the country, but I think the efforts are being made to democratize the healthcare services for every citizen in the country. So it is not just making the healthcare accessible, but also ensuring that people have access to their health information, which is their own. They have a right to share it with the providers, whenever it is required. The providers can't download and keep that information at their own, and hence, look at possibly a situation of a leakage at a later point of time, and not having the information which is not really been consented by the patient. I think that's the motivation. That's the journey that we've embarked. Still early days, but I think there's a lot of focus, lot of push from the ministry to drive this adoption, not just with the large healthcare providers, but take it to the grassroots. Because only if everybody is, or most of the players are on this platform, that's where this will really become a game changer for the country.
Oh, absolutely. I think I remember working on HL7 and DICOM 20 years back. And in those days, we used to fantasize patient's record should be patient's property. Today, it's mortgaged with the hospital or the healthcare provider, right? But I think with new technologies, and that's where sometimes I wonder, why not emphasis on healthcare, supply chain management, basic infrastructure that all three of you spoke about so nicely? Why not focus on such use cases? I find it a little trivial when people talk so much about crypto, speculative, to some extent gaming and other things. I mean, these are the real use cases which can change the face of common man's life, right? I mean, if there is a use case, it is healthcare, right? Democratization, access, transparency, single source of truth. You name a feature of Web3 and I think it fits in well with healthcare. So hopefully people are listening to us and look at it. So we are about 10 minutes away from the time allocated to us. I'll open up for any questions from the audience and then go back to you for closing remarks.
Okay, my name is Advocate Pritik Hastikar. I'm an Indian patent agent working in technology since 2006. And going back to the era of egurukul.com, the first education startup, I was even the brand ambassador. So I'll start with Abhay. Abhay said that, it's like the metaverse existed, blah, 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 since 2010. So TVS in the offline world has infringed so many patent applications, but today what you say that, what you are trying to create is that the data which is being created, according to you, it will be erased, but there's something called as Ruby on Rails. Are you aware about that? That is question number one. And since I see your background is from biotech, so are you using any particular algorithm to develop what you wish to develop? Because when you say chain, you're not mentioning the kind of algorithm you're utilizing. And why I say so, because I'm inventor of a blockchain platform where I'm looking into all the data sets, what people are doing online. And the sorry state of affair from India is the kind of algorithms the Indian startups are utilizing, it's creating havoc right now. So how you wish to resolve this issue? Thank you.
Thank you. If I can repeat the question, you were asking me, there are two or three parts to the question, right? One is about...
Okay. Let me make it simple for you. Which chain are you trying to deploy? You talked about chain, and chain. Right. Which chain are you trying to deploy, and what is the algorithm behind that deployment?
So current metaverse that TVS has is not on any chain. That's what I'm trying to say, that it is not.
So verse is not a chain.
Sorry?
According to you, metaverse is not a chain.
No, I'm saying current motoverse that TVS has is not on a chain.
So motoverse is not on a chain.
It's not on a chain.
So what's the technology? Is it proprietary?
That.
Is it proprietary, the technology you guys have developed?
The assets are our own, right? The technology is not
proprietary.
No?
So you're using open source AI?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway. Any other questions?
So thanks for a very interesting session. I'm kind of foreseeing that we are heading toward a future where a lot of these gadgets would be on our wearables. We would have that as almost as a mainstream part of our lifestyle. That the ladies, when they are going out, they are also wearing something for the sake of their own safety. But all these gadgets, devices become a core part of our lifestyle. We talked about use cases of patients and patients getting into an aspect where their data is managed increasingly by themselves. Now, when we look at a direct target audience, senior citizens of this country, for a foreseeable future, they look probably the most relevant the moment you put the medical and all those aspects into the equation. And yet when it is about comprehending technology and preparing self for a very, very digital lifestyle, it is probably the biggest challenge for that as a whole. So in this kind of a domain, how are you seeing the pathway ahead? We are educating the most vulnerable population. And I'm sure you all are well aware that most of these cyber hackers deliberately target senior citizens among all the people. So more we are trying to migrate them out of the physical banking and switch to the cyber banking. We actually make them more vulnerable rather than protected. So in this kind of a transition, how are you seeing the pathway?
Right. I think great question. I'll request all my panel members if they have any views. But if I could just talk about my perspective. See, this is a cat and mouse game. It's going to continue like this. But yes, as technologists, we are always advised, and wherever we get a chance, we advise to design better products, to design safer products, because technology in itself is of no use unless people can use it. And you rightly said, depending on for whom it is targeted, they should be most comfortable using it. And that's part of evolution. If you look at the mobile applications, which were a few years back, it was very complicated. Today it's much more easy. Similarly, some of the examples that Abhay gave about metaverse, for example, should be much easier for people to use than tick a checkbox, use a drop-down menu. That is not natural to human beings. But walking in a shopping mall is more natural to human beings, which is what probably a metaverse will allow you to do. But yes, cyber security is a huge challenge. We all understand that. It's like, your highways are being built, they are also prone to a lot of accidents. But the answer to that is probably not to stop building highways, but to educate people how to use those highways better. So I think that's the broader sense of it. But I would see if any of our panel members have any views to add to this. But that's a challenge. All of us are aware of, all of us are working towards whatever we can do.
I think, Pankaj, you've summed it up very, very well. Just a line to add there. Change is inevitable. It will continue to happen. I think the only aspect that really needs to be factored in is that you make it in a seamless, in a secured manner, and continue to build that awareness. Irrespective of that, as again Pankaj alluded, that this is a cat and mouse game. You know, people who are actually going to disrupt, not really in a good sense, you know, will continue to evolve faster. They're not really working on rules. Everything else is going to be built on rules, right? Built on specific logic, algorithms. But for them, you know, it doesn't really apply. So I don't think so we can stop evolving or stop changing because of some of the, you know, the potential threats that might be lying in the future.
Yeah, I think our engineers need to understand and, you know, evolve design much better. And that's a universal, you know, thought process. Typically in India, we have been a little behind the curve in that. And I think now there's a lot of emphasis on designing better products, better experiences.
See, so there's no case key, let's not adopt the technology. Actually, we
get your point.
But what we are actually forcing, India already has a highly digitally illiterate population. Even now, people of my age in rural areas can't even do a IRCTC booking. In that kind of a scenario, how do the bulk of Indians, or let me say bulk of the Bharat, gets well adequately adapted into using these kind of new age equipments into their lifestyle?
Yeah, so I think one line answer to that is, as a technologist, the way I look at it is, it's not for people to change for technology, it's for technology to change for people. So technology has to become more seamless, more easy, in some cases voice enabled, in some cases touch enabled, whatever makes it more easy accessible to people. That would be a better approach than expecting people to change for technology. Someone had a question there. We'll take this, yeah, last question. Okay, so we'll, yeah.
Hi, my name is Arga. I work for Sony Pictures in the technology department. I have a question for Mayank. I also have a background of working in healthcare technology. He was talking about patient records being exchanged, and P2P as a technology, which is peer-to-peer transformation of information, is not new. It's been there in US healthcare for last 15 years that we are speaking right now. One is, do you see in India a format being agreed, like they have HL7 there for patient information exchange, and it doesn't matter which system or what software anybody is using, as long as everybody is on HL7, which is government authorized. So do you see India moving in that direction? That's the one question. The second is, do we really think there is a need of moving on blockchain for these things? Because all this information or all these exchanges were possible even when there was no blockchain. So do we really need to be on a blockchain just because we have to be, or do we see a value in it than what we are at right now?
Sure. So I think very quick response to both the questions. I think HL7 as a standard protocol for exchanging information in the healthcare systems is existing, and that's a global standard. Indian providers, Indian applications also adopt to the same standard. So what we are, what is being done under ABDM is a part of HL7 or is consuming the HL7 protocols. So any information that is being exchanged is being done only in HL7, because the idea is not to really reinvent or create a new protocol for exchanging this information. Secondly, this need not be done on blockchain at all. It was envisaged, or it was being considered to be done along these lines little earlier, but with ABDM coming in, that need has now, or is kind of getting fulfilled on this platform, where you're not even storing that information. It continues to reside with the healthcare provider where it got generated. Patient has access to that information even if they have worked or they have got records with 10 different providers. It is being tagged with this, the patient's ABHA ID the unique identifier which will actually help in identifying that information, and can be transmitted to be consumed on that application with any other healthcare provider. So the information is not really being put across on a chain or on a common system. It continues to reside with the respective healthcare provider. It need not be on blockchain. The information is being sent across in a secured manner using the HL7 protocols to the consumer or wherever it is actually to be seen, and that's about it. So while some of these protocols have existed in the Western markets for a long time, India has also adopted some of these protocols, but not really in a very extensive manner, and that's where the government push is now looking at standardizing some of these things across the country.
Right, I think in the interest of time, we'll have to end this panel. If you have more questions, we can take it offline. Thank you so much for being a lovely audience, and I must thank my esteemed panelists, because you must have realized no one sitting here is trying to sell Web3 or blockchain or metaverse, and coming from the industry background that they come, they've been able to give a very realistic picture of what the future holds in terms of promise and where we are today. Obviously, it's a journey that we are all on. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.